What is Wicker? Movie explained warning. Spoiler warning. This video discusses the basic story of Wicker, details revealed in the newly released trailer, and some information from its Sundance premiere. If you want to go into the movie knowing absolutely nothing, this is your warning. Imagine being mocked by your entire village simply because you're single. Then imagine becoming so tired of everyone judging you that you decide to have someone build you the perfect husband. Not introduce you to someone, not arrange a marriage, actually build you a husband out of wicker. And somehow he comes alive. That's the wonderfully strange premise behind Wicker, the new fantasy romance starring Olivia Colman, Alexander Skarsgård, and Peter Dinklage. And if you've just watched the trailer and you're wondering, what exactly is this movie? Why is Alexander Skarsgård literally made out of wicker? And is this supposed to be a comedy, a romance, a fairy tale, or something much stranger? The answer is a little bit of everything. Wicker is an unconventional romantic fantasy adapted from Ursula Wills-Jones' short story, The Wicker Husband. The film is written and directed by Alex Huston Fisher and Eleanor Wilson. And underneath its absolutely bizarre premise, there's actually a surprisingly human story about loneliness, marriage, desire, jealousy, and what happens when someone refuses to live according to society's expectations. The story takes place in a conservative seaside village. Olivia Colman plays a character simply known as the Fisherwoman, and she's an outsider. She smells like fish, she lives by herself, she doesn't behave the way the village believes a woman should behave. Most importantly, she's unmarried. And apparently, everyone has an opinion about that. The villagers constantly ridicule her, they judge her appearance, they judge her lifestyle, and they treat her as though being unmarried somehow makes her incomplete. Eventually, she gets tired of it. But instead of changing herself to satisfy everyone else, she comes up with a much stranger solution. She visits the local basketmaker, played by Peter Dinklage, and she gives him an unusual request. She wants a husband, but not just any husband. She wants him to make one for her, literally. The basketmaker takes wicker, weaves it together, and creates a full-sized man. At this point, you'd expect the creation to remain nothing more than an elaborate sculpture, except, somehow, he comes alive. And that's where Alexander Skarsgård enters the story. He plays the Wicker Husband. And yes, he's exactly what the name suggests, a man made almost entirely from woven wicker. But here's where the movie becomes much more interesting than its premise initially suggests. The Wicker Husband isn't presented simply as a monster. He isn't Frankenstein's creature. He isn't secretly evil. And the trailer doesn't treat him like something the fisherwoman needs to escape from. Quite the opposite. He may actually be the most emotionally sincere man in the entire village. He's caring, gentle, loyal, and completely devoted to the fisherwoman. Alexander Skarsgård described playing the character as unusual because the Wicker Husband is fundamentally good-hearted rather than secretly sinister. Olivia Colman has similarly praised the soulfulness Skarsgård brings to the character. And then, something happens that nobody in the village expected. The fisherwoman genuinely falls for him. Not because she wants to prove something, not because she wants revenge on the villagers, but because this strange man made from branches treats her with more affection and respect than the supposedly normal people surrounding her ever did. And their relationship isn't exactly shy either. If you've seen the trailer, you already know what I'm talking about. The movie very deliberately embraces the physical side of their relationship, which makes the whole thing simultaneously romantic, funny, and unbelievably strange. But that's intentional. Because Wicker isn't merely asking whether a woman could fall in love with a magical wicker man, it's asking something much more uncomfortable. Why does everyone else care so much? The fisherwoman is happy. Her husband adores her. They're not hurting anyone, so why does their relationship make the village so angry? That's where the movie's social commentary begins. The Wicker Husband becomes almost like a mirror. His existence exposes the hypocrisy surrounding him. The villagers initially ridicule the fisherwoman because she doesn't have a husband. Then she gets one, and suddenly they're upset about that too, because she didn't find happiness according to their rules. And worse, she may actually be happier than they are. That's when ridicule begins turning into something much more dangerous: jealousy. The official synopsis describes the Wicker husband's arrival as triggering fascination, jealousy, and upheaval throughout the village, threatening its established social order. And that gives the title another layer. Wicker itself is made from many individual strands woven together. So is a community. So is marriage. So are social expectations. Pull the wrong strand, and suddenly the entire structure can start coming apart. The fisherwoman hasn't just commissioned herself a husband. Without realizing it, she's challenged the rules holding this entire community together. And perhaps the funniest part is that the person exposing everyone's hypocrisy isn't even technically a person. He's a basket. Which brings us to Alexander Skarsgård's incredible appearance. If you didn't know he was playing the Wicker husband, you might genuinely struggle to recognize him. The character wasn't created entirely through CGI. Skarsgård underwent an elaborate physical transformation using full-body practical prosthetics created by Weta Workshop, the legendary effects company associated with The Lord of the Rings. His face, his body, even incredibly specific parts of his anatomy were designed to look woven from wicker. Skarsgård has joked that while other actors dream about playing Hamlet, apparently his dream involved having nipples made from wicker. But beneath the joke, there's something impressive about the performance, because the costume could easily have turned the character into a gimmick. Instead, Skarsgård has to convince us that there's a genuine soul underneath all those branches. And judging from the reaction following the film's Sundance premiere, that's one of the things that appears to work particularly well. Wicker premiered at the 2026 Sundance Film Festival in January, months before its general theatrical release. Reviews have varied, but several critics responded strongly to its originality, performances, production design, and strange combination of fairy tale, comedy, and romance. And that's probably the best way to understand this movie. It's essentially a grown-up fairy tale. Think about traditional fairy tales. A frog becomes a prince. A wooden puppet becomes a boy. A beast falls in love. A sleeping princess awakens through magic. Those stories ask audiences to accept impossible transformations without worrying about the scientific explanation. Wicker seems to operate in exactly that kind of world. The important question isn't necessarily, how did the Wicker Man become alive? The more interesting question is, what happens after he does? Because suddenly this supposedly primitive creation understands love better than the people judging him. And that's where the movie's central irony becomes clear. Everyone thinks the Wicker husband is unnatural, but he may actually have one of the healthiest relationships in the entire village. Meanwhile, the supposedly respectable people surrounding them become consumed by gossip, jealousy, desire, and resentment. So who's actually behaving like the monster? The man made from sticks, or the humans? That's the question sitting underneath all the comedy. There's also something interesting about the fisherwoman herself. She isn't presented as a traditional fairy tale princess waiting for somebody to rescue her. She's abrasive, independent, messy, and completely uninterested in becoming the woman her neighbors want her to be. That's why commissioning the husband herself matters. Nobody chooses him for her, she chooses. She essentially creates the relationship she wants instead of accepting the life everyone else tells her she should have. And that makes the Wicker husband something more than a romantic partner. He becomes an act of rebellion. Peter Dinklage's basketmaker is therefore much more important than he initially appears. He's the person who takes the fisherwoman's impossible request seriously. Instead of laughing at her, he creates something extraordinary. And once that creation begins affecting everyone around them, the basketmaker has effectively introduced something into this conservative society that it doesn't know how to handle: change. The supporting cast is equally impressive. Alongside Colman, Skarsgård, and Dinklage, the movie features Elizabeth Debicki, Richard E. Grant, Marley Sue, and Nabhan Rizwan. And all of these characters exist within a village that's increasingly forced to confront the strange new relationship at its center.
That's why I wouldn't describe Wicker simply as a romance, and I definitely wouldn't describe it as horror, despite how strange Alexander Skarsgård looks. It's a fantasy comedy, a romantic fable.
And a satire about society's obsession with telling people what a normal relationship should look like. And perhaps that's why the trailer has attracted so much attention. We've seen hundreds of romantic comedies. We've seen hundreds of fantasy movies. But Olivia Colman falling passionately in love with Alexander Skarsgård while he's covered from head to toe in Wicker? That's definitely something different. The film will receive a limited theatrical release on October 23, 2026, followed by a wider release on October 30th. So, what is Wicker? On the surface, it's the story of a lonely fisherwoman who asks a basketmaker to build her a husband, and somehow gets exactly what she asked for. But underneath that wonderfully ridiculous premise, it's a story about someone refusing to accept the life society has chosen for her. It's about loneliness, desire, marriage, jealousy, and the strange rules people create around love. Most importantly, it's asking a surprisingly simple question. If two people, or in this case, one person and one extremely well-made basket, are genuinely happy together, why should anyone else get to decide that their love is wrong? And somehow, a movie about Olivia Colman falling in love with a giant wicker Alexander Skarsgård might end up having something surprisingly meaningful to say about being human.